Okay, let's turn our attention now to chapter 3 of Dorian Gray, and this is not going to take up 30 minutes. The first couple chapters, and as typically goes, is just like a lot of exposition I have to give as far as a lot of different things I want to point out, but I'll definitely try to fit chapters 3 and 4 for sure. So, chapter 3 is interesting. It is basically when we get a little tiny glimpse into who Dorian Gray is. You'll remember that I said in the first chapter's lecture that he's a blank slate, and I think that Wilde wrote him that way so that he would be so vulnerable to influence because he really doesn't stand up for anything himself yet, but also because we don't know anything about his history, like his genealogy, his growing up. You know, usually when you're introduced to a main character in a book or in a film, we know everything about that person at some point or another. Maybe not all up front, but at some point we are definitely given the full picture of where this person is coming from. We don't have that in Dorian Gray. It's not going to come, actually. We get a glimpse, and then another glimpse, and then that's it. And I think that it's because that Wilde kind of wants the reader to feel like Gray. So that we don't even know his parentage. You know what I'm saying? So he has no mother or father in this book that speak or that influence him in any way. So we are to take his character as if it was us. Okay. So, which is very uncommon, right? Of a main character protagonist, you usually know everything about that person. So in chapter 3, we're kind of getting a sense of the close relationship that Gray and Harry are going to have. Gray maintains friendship with Basil throughout the book, okay? It does end at a point, but we're not there yet. But he will definitely still be friends with Harry. The only thing that's going to change for their relationship, Gray's and Harry's, is Dorian Gray is going to stop trusting him at some point. But at the point when he stops trusting Harry, it's going to be way too late. Like way, way too late. So here we just are kind of getting a sense of this friendship that is blossoming, let's say, okay? And we have a glimpse into who Dorian Gray is. And there's a big paragraph that reads, Kelso's grandson, it begins, echoed the old gentleman. Kelso's grandson, of course, I knew his mother intimately. I believe I was at her christening. She was an extraordinarily beautiful girl, Margaret Devereux. So now here we have where Dorian gets his beauty from. He gets it from his mother and made all the men frantic by running away with a penniless young fellow, a mere nobody, a subaltern in a foot regiment or something of that kind. Certainly, I remember the whole thing as if it happened yesterday. The poor chap was killed in a duel at Spa, which was a Belgian health place where people sometimes in Europe would go to get better from ailments, a few months after the marriage. There was an ugly story about it. They say Kelso got some rascally adventurer, some Belgian brute, to insult his son-in-law in public, paid him, sir, to do it, paid him, and that the fellow spitted the man as if he had been a pigeon. The thing was hushed up, but egad, Kelso ate his chop alone at the club for some time afterward. He brought his daughter back with him, I was told, and she never spoke to him again. Oh, yes, it was a bad business. The girl died too, died within a year. So she left his son, did she? I had forgotten that. What sort of boy is he? If he is like his mother, he must be a good-looking chap. He's very good-looking, assented Lord Henry. So Dorian doesn't even know who his parents were. His mother was some wealthy, well-off, beautiful young woman who obviously thought more of love over riches and ran away with some guy she fell in love with. And then her father connived to have this man killed so that he would bring her back. But when he brought her back, she was already with child. And so she gave birth to Dorian and then probably died soon after, maybe during childbirth or shortly thereafter. We're not sure, and we're never going to know. So now here is a very important part where I talked about beauty being one of the themes. So these characters in the book, they are like magnetized towards beauty, like a moth to a light, okay? Anything that's beautiful, they're on it. But anything that's ugly, they shun, they run, they flee. Exactly the opposite reaction. This won't always be this way for Dorian, but it's kind of how he gets seduced into this idea of beauty. Behind every exquisite thing that existed, there was something tragic. Worlds had to be in travail, the meanest flower might blow. How charming he had been at dinner the night before, as with startled eyes and lips parted in fright and pleasure he had sat opposite to him at the club, the red candle shades staining to a richer rose the wakening wonder of his face. Talking to him was like playing upon an exquisite violin. He answered to every touch and thrill of the bow. Now this is the narrator talking about Henry and Dorian talking, okay? There was something terribly enthralling in the exercise of influence. No other activity was like it. To project one's soul into some gracious form and let it tarry there for a moment. Tarry, T-A-R-R-Y, means to kind of wait. To hear one's own intellectual views echoed back to one with all the added music of passion and youth to convey one's temperament into another, as though it were a subtle fluid of a strange perfume. Harry's what we know about Harry, everybody cares about something, right? Basil cares about art. What does Harry care about if he's laughing throughout the whole book? What does he care about? Harry cares about influence and making his mark, I think, on people. And I think that's why he's so bold in his statements and wants to stand out for that. Because he likes to make people laugh. He likes to make people guffaw. He likes to make people gawk, and he likes to get a reaction out of them. So maybe he likes being attentive, like the center of attention. But then he sees Dorian, and he says this. Yes, the narrator says this about Harry. Yes, Harry, would try to be to Dorian Gray what, without knowing it, the lad was to the painter who had fashioned the wonderful portrait. He would seek to dominate him, had already indeed half done so. He would make that wonderful spirit his own. There was something fascinating in this son of love and death. Now, Dorian's going to have a couple of names, but again, that verb dominate. Right? That to dominate him. That's so, like, Harry is intent on dominating Dorian. Like, it's kind of a lot, right? And then he coins, I told you, visible emblem, visible image, visible symbol, whatever. That phrase is going to be, and I'll point it out every time, trust me. But he calls Dorian the son of love and death. And that's, if it seems a little familiar to you, well, that's because he's playing, what Wilde is doing there is he's playing on the term in Christian theology, where Christians refer to Jesus as the Son of God and the Son of Man. I was actually just listening to a lecture on this the other time that Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man 63 times in the Bible. And then like a couple of other times, others refer to him as the Son of God. But, so that's what he's playing on, love and death, right? As if those were two opposites, like God and man, dual, dichotomous, maybe? We don't know, right? So, he's with his friends. Dorian Gray is getting comfortable in Harry's circle now. There's this Lady Agatha there. And Lord Henry is, just being a jokester again. And she says to Dorian, "Don't mind him, my dear. He never means anything that he says." So his circle is quite aware of how Harry doesn't really mean the things that he says. He's just a talker. He just likes the attention. Then they go on. And now we're getting a sense from Dorian's perspective by the narrator still. Most of this is narrated, which means it is told instead of shown, right? Like a writer has to always make choices. What am I going to narrate and what am I going to dramatize? And what is dramatized is those scenes that we see where the actors are talking and doing something. And then the narration is what we're being told everyone's thinking or feeling. And, it's like watching a portrait. So we're being told from Dorian, he felt that the eyes of Dorian Gray were fixed on him, and the consciousness that among his audience there was one temperament he wished to fascinate. He was brilliant, fantastic, irresponsible. This is him talking about the narrator. Sorry, my nose is itchy. The narrator talking about Lord Henry. He charmed his listeners out of themselves, and they followed his pipe laughing. Dorian Gray never took his gaze off him, but sat like one under a spell, smiles chasing each other over his lips, and wonder growing grave in his darkening eyes. So he's being influenced. It's kind of like the picture of influence. Like if it was a scene in a movie, it would be like just music, and you would see people like talking and Lord Henry like holding court and being like and everyone's laughing, and then this Dorian is like yes. Okay, then someone points out that Lord Henry is dangerous, and let's jump to chapter 4. So chapter 3 was just kind of just getting a sense of how close Lord Henry and Dorian were getting, right, after they left Basil's studio. They hang out a bunch of times. Now, chapter 4, a drastic change happens in the book very quickly, especially to our main character. Let me see. I believe we're at the opera here. And Lord Henry says, never marry at all, Dorian. And then, again, they're talking with friends. And men marry because they are tired. Women because they're curious, and both are disappointed. Again, another witticism from Wilde, right? And Dorian says, I don't think I'm likely to marry Harry. I'm too much in love. That is one of your aphorisms. I am putting it into practice as I do everything you say. Okay, so Dorian just first admitted, I'm putting into practice everything you say. Like, you may not mean it when you say it, but I think you mean it, and I'm doing it. You may not live by your standards of hedonism and all this nonsense about marriage, but I'm going to live like that, right? Who are you in love with? Asked Lord Henry. With an actress, Dorian Gray says, blushing. Lord Henry shrugs his shoulders. That's a rather commonplace debut. You would not say so if you saw her, Harry. Who is she? Her name is Sibyl Vane. Okay, so now jump to that. They have this whole conversation where you can imagine Lord Henry is trying to convince Dorian, whatever you see in this girl, please, just don't marry her. You're going to ruin your life, right? And then Dorian Gray says, to the present day, I can't make out why I did so. I know, but I really went and paid. Oh, okay. I would have missed the greatest romance of my life. I see you are laughing. It is horrid of you. Okay, I'm not laughing, Dorian. At least I'm not laughing at you. But you should not say the greatest romance of your life. You should say the first romance of your life. Okay, they go back and forth, back and forth. Then going through this whole thing, he's talking about the different plays she's been in, Romeo and Juliet, blah, blah, blah. And he's just praising her. Dorian is praising her because he goes and he sees these plays, and he said he paid a special box just for him. And he is just in love with this actress who he's seen in all these different roles. She's Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. She's all these things. He lists all of these things. Dorian says, you know how a voice can stir one, right? And he's still talking to Lord Henry. Your voice and the voice of Sibyl Vane are two things that I shall never forget. When I close my eyes, I hear them, and each of them says something different. I don't know which to follow. So Dorian Gray, right? Because he is not the type of guy who makes a move on his own, apparently. He needs validation from other people to do what he wants to do. I mean, we know people like this in our life, right? Then he regrets, just like Basil regrets telling Harry about Dorian. Dorian regrets telling Harry about Sibyl. I wish now I had not told you about Sibyl Vane, he says. And then Lord Henry says, you could not have helped telling me, Dorian. All through your life you will tell me everything you do. Okay, now we just met. Okay, so Sibyl Vane, again, is similar to Dorian Gray. She's not in this scene yet, okay? But she's all over the scene, right? All they're talking about is Sibyl Vane. And Dorian just continues to praise her, like put her on a pedestal and just be like, watch, you're going to shut up, Harry, when you see her and when you see how talented she is. She's going to actually make you shut up for once. He says, yes, she will. She has not merely consummate art instinct in her, but she has personality also. And you have often told me that it is personalities, not principles, that move the age. And then as far as Basil, all of a sudden, Lord Henry says, hey, have you seen Basil? And he said, dear Basil, Dorian says, I've not laid eyes on him for a week. It's rather horrid of me, as he sent me my portrait in the most wonderful frame, specially designed by himself. And though I am a little jealous of the picture for being a whole month younger than I am, I must admit that I delight in it. Perhaps you had better write to him. I don't want to see him alone. Listen, he says things that annoy me. He gives me good advice. So if we were to make an analogy, Basil would be like Dorian's parent, right? Because Dorian had never had a parent, and we're going to see how kind of messed up his childhood was with his grandfather much later in the book. Like actually like 100 pages into the book. But so Basil says the good stuff, the good advice, the thing that's annoying you, right, as a kid. And then like Lord Henry's the wild uncle who just like, yeah, like you're like, why can't you be my dad? Because you say everything, and I'm just like, you know, I want to hang out with you. Okay, I'm just ready to see if, then we come back to this again, the soul and body, body and soul, how mysterious they were. Right, again, Wilde is coming back to this theme. There was animalism in the soul, and the body had its moments of spirituality. So he's kind of saying how they're intermingled. You know, you can think about it like yin and yang, right? They're not like, the yin and yang is like a circle, but it's not split down the middle, right? They interpose with each other, right? Like this. So they're kind of fitting, like nature, like it's meant to be, right? There's animalism in the soul, like animal instinct, and the body has moments of spirituality, right? The separation of spirit from matter was a mystery, and the union of spirit with matter was a mystery also. I'm pretty sure that's bordering on alchemy. So again, I'm just trying to pick up some things at the very end of chapter 4. Not only does he say that he's in love with Sibyl Vane, but when Lord Henry comes home, when he arrived home about 12:30, he saw a telegram lying on the hall table. He opened it and found it was from Dorian Gray. It was to tell him that he was engaged to be married to Sibyl Vane. So we don't even see Sibyl, but she's such a huge change. Seems like, you know, you would think like maybe Harry would be threatened by Sibyl the way that Basil was threatened by Harry. I mean, Dorian Gray just seems to be like on everybody's most wanted list. But things are going to take a turn. Now, chapter 5, let's just really just jump into chapter 5, right? Before we're introduced, before, let me put it this way, before Sibyl is introduced to Dorian's friends, we as the reader kind of get a little peek into her life and who she is, because you must be like, oh my God, Dorian Gray is engaged. She's got to be gorgeous. She must be intelligent. She must be wealthy. She must be talented. She must be something, right? For this amazingly eligible bachelor who everybody wants to be with, to take him off the market immediately. So Wilde shows a Sibyl Vane, and looks like Dorian did inherit a bit of his mother in him, not just her looks, but maybe her instinct to fall in love. And it looks like his mother was not so prone to influence from others, or else she probably would not have run away with that man who was Dorian's father. Dorian, we know, is not like that. Dorian is very succumbing to influence. So here we have Sibyl Vane's life, and Sibyl is poor. Let's just put it that way. You know, she comes home and she tells her mother that she's engaged. She does not tell her mother his name. She does not say Dorian Gray. She calls him Prince Charming because, like Cinderella, she is going to be plucked from her situation and be made a princess and live a fairy tale life, even though she's living poor. Mother, mother, I'm so happy, whispered the girl, burying her face in the lap of a faded, tired-looking woman who, with back turned to the shrill, intrusive light, was sitting in a one armchair that their dingy sitting room contained. I'm so happy, and you must be happy, too. Happy? I'm only happy, Sibyl, when I see you act. You must not think of anything but your acting. Mr. Isaacs has been very good to us, and we owe him money. Money, mother? What does money matter? Love is more than money. Oh, it sounds like a Dorian Gray's mother, maybe, right? Now, she's talking about Mr. Isaacs. I guess he's the one who runs the theater. He's helping out Sibyl Vane. And the mother, the elderly mother, says, I don't know how we could manage without him. And Sibyl Vane tossed her head and laughed. She says, we don't want him anymore, mother. Prince Charming rules life for us now. And then her mother says, foolish child, foolish child. This whole chapter I'm not going to go through it with you very in depth because basically the whole chapter is just Sibyl Vane convincing her family, which is two people, her mother and her brother James Vane, and that she's going to be married, that he is wealthy, that he is going to make everything good for her and her family. Okay. And so, of course, they're skeptical. I mean, of course, like if it was your daughter and she's coming home and like, he's going to whisk me away and he's going to help us. And she's like, okay, yeah, fairy tale, right? That's like a fairy tale. And then her brother is very protective, as any older brother would be. And he says, why? You don't even know his name. Who is he? I have a right to know. He is called Prince Charming. Don't you like the name? Oh, you silly boy. You should never forget it. If only you saw him, you would think him the most wonderful person in the world. So Sibyl Vane is very naive. She's also very in love. They go back and forth, James and Sibyl, and this starts to get very tense. She said, he asks, he is a gentleman? Like a wealthy aristocrat kind of guy. And she said, a prince, what more do you want? And James says, he wants to enslave you. And she says, I shudder at the thought of being free. And he says, I want you to beware of him. And she says, to see him is to worship him, to know him is to trust him. And then James says, Sibyl, you are mad about him. And mad being, crazy. Like you've lost your ever-loving mind. Things like this don't happen. And if something looks too good to be true, then be careful, right? So, chapter 6, I want to, let's do chapter 6. Okay, chapter 6, everybody's found out the news about about Dorian being engaged, and everybody has their own reaction to it. Harry is talking to Basil, and they're having their own conversation about Dorian. Dorian's there. My dear Harry, my dear Basil, you must both congratulate me, said the lad. Now here, this is great too, right? The lad. Now, when Oscar Wilde is referring to Dorian as the lad, you're thinking, oh, young boy, okay? Because he is. He's still young. Remember, he's just barely met Harry. He's just barely had the portrait done. Remember, Basil sent over the portrait like a couple of chapters ago. So this is all happening quickly, okay? I've never been so happy. Of course, it is sudden. All really delightful things are. And yet it seems to me to be the one thing I've been looking for all my life. I hope you will always be very happy, Dorian, said Basil. But I don't quite forgive you for not having let me know of your engagement. You let Harry know. And I don't forgive you for being late for dinner, broke in Harry, putting his hand on the lad's shoulder and smiling as he spoke. Come, let us sit down and try what the new chef here is like. And then you'll tell us all how it came about. And then Dorian's super, super excited about he's telling how he proposed to Sibyl. We kissed each other. I can't describe to you what I felt at that moment. It seemed to me that all my life had been narrowed to one perfect point of rose-colored joy. She trembled all over and shook like a white narcissus. Then she flung herself on her knees and kissed my hands. I feel that I should tell you all of this, but I can't help it. Of course, our engagement is a dead secret. She's not even told her mother. I don't know what my guardians will say. Lord Radley is sure to be furious. I don't care. She'll be of age in less than a year, and then I can do what I like. He's talking about the trust that he's going to inherit from his grandfather. There's people or administrators or executors of a trust. Now, once Dorian comes into his own money, it's all his once he reaches an age. But as of now, he's got guardianship over his finances, as any young person does when they have a lot of money and they've inherited it. And then he says, when you see Sibyl Vane, you will feel that the man who could wrong her would be a beast. And this is really important, okay? A beast without a heart. I cannot understand how anyone can wish to shame the thing he loves. I love Sibyl Vane. I want to place her on a pedestal of gold and to see the world worship the woman who is mine. What is marriage? An irrevocable vow. You mock at it for that. Don't mock. It is an irrevocable vow that I want to take. Her trust makes me faithful. Her belief makes me good. Do you see how he doesn't have any of his own attributes? He's saying, like, when he's around Harry, he's like this. When he's around Basil, he's like this. When he's around Sibyl, he's like this. He's got no personality of his own. When I'm with her, I regret all that you have taught me. He's talking to Harry. I've become different from what you have known me to be. I am changed, and the mere touch of Sibyl Vane's hand makes me forget you and all your wrong, fascinating, poisonous, delightful theories. I love that little ring of, is that what I want to call it, a ring or a line of adjectives? Because they're dual and dichotomous. Wrong, but fascinating. Poisonous, but delightful. It's like the temptation of something you know is bad for you, but you keep getting called to it, and you keep getting called to it, and you just can't resist, but you know you should. Like a drug, I guess, right? To be good is to be in harmony with one's self. This is what Harry says. Now, Harry's very even Steven, okay? We've seen Basil have emotion. We see Dorian have emotion. We see Sibyl Vane have a lot of emotion. In fact, Dorian is very quick to move. Like, when he makes a decision, he's very quick to move. And like that, I was just, I lectures on Siddhartha on this channel, and I've pointed to him as a striking protagonist who, when he makes a decision, he doesn't really think long. He's like, boom, I'm doing it. And his whole life has been like that. Dorian's similar in that way. And so Dorian Gray says, I know what pleasure really is. It is to adore someone. Okay, so now, Dorian leaves with Harry. He says, let us go, Dorian. You'll come with me. I'm so sorry, Basil, but there's only room for two in the Brockham. You must follow us in the hansom. They're going to go see Sibyl perform. So Dorian is so excited. He's like, you guys, just wait. Everything I'm telling you about this woman, or about this girl rather, because she's a little girl. She's not a little girl. It sounds terrible. She's like 17. Everything I've told you about her is so true. And I don't even have to say it because you're going to see it for yourself. So he's stoked. Now he and Harry leave in one carriage. And then he's like, oh, I'm so sorry, Basil. There's only room for us, not for you. So Basil has to follow afterwards. And this is a really, really important paragraph in the book. And it's the end in the last paragraph of chapter 6. And it's where I'm going to leave this lecture. They got up and put on their coats, sipping their coffee standing. The painter was silent and preoccupied. That's Basil. There was a gloom over him. He could not bear this marriage, and yet it seemed to him to be better than many other things that might have happened. After a few minutes, they all passed downstairs. He drove off by himself, that had been arranged, and watched the flashing lights of the little brougham in front of him. A strange sense of loss came over him. He felt that Dorian Gray would never again be to him all that he had been in the past. Life had come between them. His eyes darkened, and the crowded, flaring streets became blurred to his eyes. When the cab drew up at the theater, it seemed to him that he had grown years older. This is important because I talk about it all the time with poetry and with prose and with basically all visual art for sure, and literature, just period. Form begins with light and dark, and I haven't hit on too much light and dark throughout because there really hasn't been points yet where the light and dark symbolism are really, really important to the plot. But here we start to get a sense, and you start to see this this dichotomy. He sees the lights now. The lights are in the carriage in front of him, okay? And his eyes are darkening, and the streets are crowded and flaring. So now Basil, who's the artist, who kind of brought Dorian Gray into this whole world and into this whole story that we're reading, he was the light in the beginning. You remember his studio was filled with light. Let me just read that, actually, that first line of the whole book. The studio was filled with the rich odor of roses and when the light summer wind. So we have references of light in the very beginning. Not like physical light, but we saw sunlight, right? Sunlight going through the trees and all that stuff. And now things are starting to change. And it literally says that, the narrator says that Basil starts to sense something is changing. And it makes him very sad. He feels like he's lost something. He does have a crush on Dorian, obviously. I don't think he expected Dorian to be with him, because this is Victorian England after all, but I think that he is sensing like at least he had a shot or a hope, or he could just toy with the idea as long as he wasn't married or dating someone, or certainly not married. And so here Basil is like, eh. And also I think he feels like he's lost his friend. You know, Dorian was Basil's friend, and now we know as readers, right, it's called dramatic irony, when we know something that the characters in the play or book or film don't know. We know that Dorian's been avoiding Basil. And by now, as time has passed, I'm sure Basil is also pretty aware that Dorian's been avoiding him. And so the sense of loss. And so we're starting to see the first inflections of light and dark oscillating in the scenes. And this is going to become very important going forward, and especially in the last couple chapters. And as Dorian's, character arc continues to unfold. But that was it. That's chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6. Wow, that's great. And I'm definitely going to have one whole lecture dedicated to chapter 7 because it's a doozy.